Dr. Taylor Marshall is with us now, the author of Infiltration, the infiltration of the Catholic Church, the plot to destroy the church from within. This is a universal story now. Doctor, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Glenn.
You bet. So we follow your work a great deal because you talk about other things other than Catholic things. But I want to make sure that people understand right from the beginning. We are not taking on the Catholic Church, and this is not a Catholic bash session.
No, not at all. I consider myself a Catholic. I attend Mass every day, sometimes more. I have a beautiful Catholic family. We have 8 children.
Jeez.
And I love Christ. I love the church. And that bothers me that there's these wolves in sheep's clothing, in shepherd's clothing even, doing horrible things to children, to bank finances, to all kinds of scandals. And I think that the answer is just to shine light on it and to expose it. And so that we can have some true change and get things back on track the way God wants it.
Right. And there's going to be a lot of Catholics that listen and will hear you, like Nancy Pelosi, who consider themselves Catholic, that will disagree strongly with some of the things that you're saying. But I think that's the point, because there is this kind of feeling among Catholics about Pope Francis. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? I don't know if we'll ever get to that question, but I want to talk about Pope Benedict, because this was very bizarre when Pope Benedict resigned. I think it was the first time, right? Where he resigned in...
Well, it's first time in 597 years.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
All right.
Pretty rare event, yeah.
Right. And when he resigned, it seemed very odd. It was preceded by European banks pulling the plug on the Vatican Bank, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, actually, if we go back just a little bit more, a few months before the Vatican Bank having a kind of a meltdown, there was the butler of Pope Benedict. His name was Paolo Gabrielli, and he was leaking documents to the press and to journalists, and no one knew how this was happening. And finally, he was caught. He pled guilty, and he was sentenced to prison in the Vatican. Then Pope Benedict oddly pardoned him, and that led to a whole investigation that was headed up by Benedict, a secret investigation. 3 cardinals did it, and they presented to him. Their sources say 1 or 2 red binders of all kinds of filth in it, bank scandals. There's rumored to be pictures of cardinals in drag in those binders, all kinds of nasty things. And that all happened in December of 2012. And then January 1st of 13, the Vatican museums cannot process money. The ATM machines in Vatican City stop working. And shortly thereafter, we have the announcement of Pope Benedict that he's going to resign. The very next day, all those banking problems were fixed. They were resolved. And by the way, that night that Pope Benedict announced that he was going to resign, that's the night when the lightning struck the Vatican, which everyone noticed, which was a sign for a lot of people. So
this is right along the lines of what we're seeing in the deep state in the United States. We are seeing with World Economic Forum, which I know you are very well aware of. Is there any evidence that this banking thing was to put pressure on the Pope? Get out.
I think so. And the reason for this, and you say deep state, and I really think everyone needs to put it in their vocab, deep church. The same thing happening in the state is happening in the church. We can refer to deep state and we can refer to deep church. And
it is not just the Catholic Church. These people have been working behind the scenes for years.
Yes, and you got to remember that the Vatican is unique in that the Vatican is its own nation. It's called a city-state. It has its own sovereignty. Technically, Vatican City does not belong to Italy. It's its own micro-country. And as a micro-country, it has its own bank. Now, I just want the listeners to think about this. If you are a drug runner, a human trafficker, a mob boss, your biggest problem is what do you do with all this money? You've got to launder. You got to get it into legit means and move it around, right? And what if there were a bank on earth that belonged to a micro nation that was not regulated by the EU, that was not regulated or audited by anyone on the outside. Well, there is that bank in the world, and that bank is called the Vatican Bank. And so every crony on earth wants a piece of that bank because you can legitimize illegitimate money. And that's why the Vatican Bank has had a problem of scandals almost every 5 to 10 years since the 1960s. The temptation to use that Vatican Bank is high, and the temptation for corrupt cardinals in the church to let people get their fingers into that pie is also very high. And that's only one piece of this whole puzzle. But I think that helps people understand why the Vatican Bank is constantly plagued with scandals.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand the good guy here. Benedict, is it your thesis that Benedict was working to end all that corruption and expose it, and possibly even his butler was being used by Pope Benedict to out all of this stuff? Go ahead.
Yeah, those are questions that we're still trying to figure out. And I want to be very careful not to say, Pope Benedict was the, super saint mastermind playing 4D chess. I mean, this is an old man who's in his 80s. And I mean, it's very few of us have had the experience of being old and tired and surrounded. And so I don't think we can make it just as easy as the good guys and the bad guys here, but definitely Pope Benedict was doing investigations, and he appointed a man who's become very famous in the last few years, Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano.
I love him.
To audit. Yeah, he's great. He's a good guy. He appointed him back in, I think it was 2009. He appointed him Secretary General of the Vatican City Governorate. And this is sort of a ruling body. And he wanted him to look into the financial accountability of the Vatican Bank. And as soon as he was hired by Benedict for this job, he found a negative deficit of the equivalent of 10.5 million, and then found in a surplus of random money that was in various bank accounts of 44 million. He did that in just 12 months, Vigano did, which shows you that the people who were already in there were playing fast and loose with the accounting. So Vigano exposed that. Immediately, he was being called out by his superiors, some cardinals. I won't go into all the names, but if you want them, I can give them to you.
No, that's all right.
And he got in big trouble. And so what did Benedict do? He took Vigano and said, okay, look, you're in hot water here. I'm going to transfer you to be the apostolic nuncio, the ambassador to America, Washington, D.C. Now I want you to go and do an audit on the American bishops in the American Catholic Church. That's what Vigano did. And guess what? He uncovered the Cardinal McCarrick scandal. Cardinal McCarrick was the Archbishop of D.C. who was molesting children, embezzling money, just a wicked Judas of a man. Vigano exposed that. And then, of course, Vigano has spent the last 5 years pointing the finger at Francis for corruption. So all these characters are woven together. It's a pretty small world in the Vatican.
So let me switch topics here and kind of go to what happened, yesterday or day before. Unprecedented. A pope writes a book, and it is held until after his death, and he just exposes some really nasty things. And I want to get into your thoughts on that. What did he say? Why did he wait? And what is going to be the fallout from it? And what should it teach for everybody else in all of our churches that aren't Catholic? So it was a tell-all memoir, and it's a book of really unexpected revelations, and it came from the Vatican. It came from the Archbishop who was the right-hand man of Pope Benedict, and it was supposedly written by the two of them, I think, or Pope Benedict, and it exposes all of the things Pope Benedict wanted to expose, and it's some nasty expose. Never really done before. Am I right?
Yeah, this is, as far as I know, never been done. There was a rumor that Pope Benedict was going to release his final spiritual testimony after he died, and after he died, it came out, and everybody said it was a nothing burger. It kind of reminisced about his childhood and his family.
Yeah.
And then yesterday and the day before, this book dropped. It's in Italian. I actually have an advanced English copy of it. I don't know if it's official or not, but I'll just read you a section from it. This is Pope Benedict. He says, quote, "In several seminaries, homosexual clubs were formed, which acted more or less openly and which clearly changed the atmosphere in seminaries. In a seminary in southern Germany, candidates for the priesthood and candidates for the lay office of pastoral contact lived together." And it goes on. And he talks about also the American bishops and how they sort of lost their vision for the gospel, for assisting the poor, for preaching the truth, drawing people to Jesus Christ. And instead kind of just became, not in his words, but sort of the chaplains to the Democratic Party, the woke agenda, the great. And this kind of makes sense. I mean, if you're Satan, you want to be in the highest corridors of power. And that has to do with both religion and politics. And there was a woman named Bella Dodd who in the 50s said she was a communist operator and she had a big conversion. And she said that she had placed over 1,000 communist men in the seminaries. That was back then. So this kind of thing is happening, and it's just like we have the deep state.
Right.
This is the deep church.
So Pope Francis recently came out and said the devil is among us. And he has talked about a great evil. It sounds like this is what Benedict was also warning against, but I don't think they see things the same way, or do they?
Well, I liked your comment that you made last week. They're both talking about the devil. They're both talking about evil, but they seem to be pointing at one another.
Right.
I think your observation there was a good one. I think there's definitely a war in the Vatican. And this kind of goes back to the 60s. There was this council. You mentioned it in your video, too, about a bad council, a bad mass, third secret of Fatima. But in the 1960s, there was a Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965. It was super optimistic. This is the era of color TV and moon landings and all that. And there's this idea, we need to make Christianity, we need to make Catholicism groovy.
And that's exactly the right word, too, because it's just those kind of churches are just as hip as groovy is.
They
work just as well.
And so there's this idea we can update and make things cool. So we'll change the liturgy, we'll change the hymns, we'll change the art, we'll make things modern. And what we'll do is we'll just give a facelift to Catholicism so it's not medieval with incense and bells and robes. And we'll just be really cool. Well, there's been this battle for the past 60 years on whether that is an actual improvement or if it's been detrimental. Mm-hmm. And it goes hand in hand with the global political agenda. Should we be on board? I mean, should we be downplaying abortion, downplaying gay marriage, and this has been the battle. And the lines are kind of drawn along that fault line. And I think Benedict XVI, as a young man, was a little bit more liberal and more modern. As he aged, as he was a pope, he's turned the wheel right. Francis has always been a South American liberation theology, radical Jesuit modernist. And that's just who he is. And he hasn't, if anything, he's only gotten more and more leftist the longer he lives and the longer he's pope.
So go ahead. No, go ahead.
So by having these two camps, you see also like Pope Francis, for example, is trying to ban the traditional Latin Mass. He doesn't like it when priests wear cassocks. He doesn't like the Gregorian chant. He doesn't like the old stuff. And he's very much on board with the vaccine and the green theology and the great. And he sends representatives to Davos. I mean, this is his worldview. And so when he talks about the devil, I'm not so sure he's talking about the same person that Benedict's talking about.
Right. So when I was at the Vatican, this is under Benedict, I had no idea why they did this. It was a surprise to me, but I was allowed to go into the secret archives with the chief archivist and the head of the university. Both of them were the, counselors to the Pope at the time. And they talked about a war in the Vatican. And It was described to me later by a cardinal as really, truly a civil war. And they were saying it is the soul of the church. And, we kind of hope Benedict wins, but it's not clear at all. It was shortly after that Benedict retired. And it seemed like, almost in retrospect, almost as if the cardinals knew this could be a possibility, that he would either be killed or he would have to retire. Evil is becoming more and more clear, at least to me it is. And before we go on to the war that's going on in the deep church, Archbishop Vigano at one point here recently called out George Soros, Klaus Schwab, and Bill Gates. And this is the guy who was calling out all the pedophiles and the banking scandals. Why did he call those three out?
Well, as time goes on, we see that the deep church and the deep state, the puppet strings all lead back to the same fingers. So, of course, Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, the usual suspects. Because you have to realize that the most powerful people in the deep state, the billionaires and the technology giants, they have a strategy not just for politics but also for economics. Mm-hmm. They have a policy for religion. I mean, all the great tyrants have to also control religion. I mean, this has to be done. This is thought control, and the most powerful thoughts that people have and the most powerful feelings they have are almost always associated to their religion, to their faith, to their convictions. And so this has to be controlled. And,
correct.
The biggest united religion on earth is Catholicism, with a very centralized nervous system in Vatican City. So, of course, they're going to go after that. And Archbishop Vigano, who worked in the Vatican, who exposed corruption in the Vatican Bank, who worked in Washington, D.C., and he knows the Clintons, he knows the Obamas, he knows all of these people, and he's met every single Catholic bishop in America and all the cardinals in America. He has the receipts. And so he's in a very unique position, perhaps more than anyone else alive, to have worked in Vatican, in D.C., and to see all these things sprouting.
He's very clear on good and evil, and he say this is a one world government that is being built by those people in the WEF, and it is one world religion and everything else. That's what he's really warning about, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, and he was sending warnings to President Trump during the campaign. In fact, he even sent a message during one of the major rallies that I read from the Supreme Court steps on behalf of Archbishop Vigano.
How does this relate, what's going on and being exposed in the Vatican, to all of our other churches?
Well, I think it goes back to thought control. They want to control our actions. They want to control our words. If you say certain things, you're going to be canceled. Just look what Elon Musk has exposed in the past several months. And then they want to ultimately control your thoughts. People know about the book of Revelation and the mark of the beast, 666 on the forehead, and all that. Mm-hmm. But think about the significance of the forehead. I mean, that is branding the sign of the devil upon your mind. Yes, there very much could be a physical manifestation of a sign on your forehead, but ultimately, evil wants to take ownership and brand your mind and control your thoughts. And that's where all the tentacles are reaching, is complete thought control. You will own nothing. You will have nothing of your own. You won't even have your thoughts. And allegedly, we're going to be happy, is what they tell us at the Great Reset. And
it's actually in their in one of their videos that even your thoughts, your dreams will be known. So you really will not control your thoughts or be in charge of your thoughts. You won't know which are your thoughts or their thoughts. It's really spooky.
And that's ultimately the mark of the beast right there.
Yes, it is.
You have 666 on your forehead, literally. And whether it's a contraption, whether it's a tattoo. I mean, we can debate that all day, but the significance of it is that your mind belongs to evil.
And is there any doubt in your mind that this is actual evil, like we probably haven't seen since maybe the 1930s and 40s? Any doubt in your mind?
There's no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt. The powers, back then they had machine guns and planes. Now we have technology. You know, now we people can spy on you through your phone. They can they can control so much, and that hasn't yet been tested by tyrants. And so now we're starting to experience it.
Mm. Thank you so much, Doctor. I hope we get a chance to meet soon. I'd love to have you back and talk about the World Economic Forum and the things that you know about that I might have missed. You spread a lot of good in the world with your podcast. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you, Glenn.
You bet. Bye-bye. Really, I think very reasonable, well thought out man. His name is Dr. Taylor Marshall. He is the author of the book Infiltration and the host of the Dr. Taylor Marshall podcast. You can find his podcast at youtube.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall.